In the render row function, we drop into this view and add a text element. For this element, we want a larger font size. Let's set that to 20 and a font weight of 600. And for the text that we want to display, we pull in the row data.fullname property. Let's test that out again. Head over to search, search for React, and press search. And cool! Before we start building out the rest of the row, we quickly remove this wrapping touchable highlight here. It's not required for what we want to build. We also remove all the style associated to this wrapper view element. We don't need any of that. Okay, so what we want to have for each repository below the title are 3 cells laid out from left to right. So we create this view, make it a flex box, and specify that we want the flex direction to be row. We also want the elements to be spread evenly in the row, and for that we specify the space between value for the justify content property. I just love flexbox. We also need to add a bit of spacing for this element at the top using margin top, and the same at the bottom using margin bottom. Before we start binding to data in here, we need to pull in a style sheet. We're going to have 3 very similar cells with a lot of repetitive styling shared between them, so it'll be worth our time to do it once in a style sheet and reuse it. And as we did with the other components, we define the style sheet below the component definition and call it styles. We assign that to the results of stylesheet.create and pass that an empty object, which we'll fill up with some rules now. We define a rule called repo cell, and in here we specify a width of 50 and a line items value of center. Let's move on to the next rule. This one is called repo cell icon, which we'll use to style our icons. We want this one to have a width of 20 and a height of 20. Next rule. This one is called repo cell label. As you can no doubt deduce from the name of the rule, this one will contain some text, and we want to align its text in the center. Let's start using these style rules and bind to the data on each row now. We add a view element and apply the repo cell style to it. In here, we add an image and add a source attribute for it. We're going to reference an image which we made part of our Xcode project in an earlier module. And to do this, we use require and the word image followed by an exclamation mark. Then we type the name of the image in the Xcode project, which in this case is star. Now we add a style rule onto this image element, which in this case is repo cell icon. Below this image, we add a text element and give it a style of repo cell label. In here, we just bind to the stargazers count property on the row data. Let's test that in the simulator. Now when we search, it's got the new cell over here with the number of stars on the repo associated with the star icon. Let's add the next cell, which will contain the number of forks from the repo. It's going to be very similar to the cell over here, so we duplicate it. Now we change the image to fork and bind it to the forks value instead. When we test that by doing another search for React over here, great, you can see that the fork cell came in here on the right. It was the work of the space between value we set on the justify content flexbox property on the container of these cells that made this item be laid out all the way over the right here, in case you were wondering about that. Once again, we duplicate the cell over here and change the image to reference the issues_2 image, which is also part of our Xcode project, and change this binding over here to pull in the open issues property instead. Let's test that out. We reload, search for React, and great! All the bindings seem to be working correctly and our layout seems to work fine. Our rows can be a bit clearer though, so let's go up here and start adding some style on this wrapper view. We add a padding value of 20 and the border color value we set to a grey color. We also need to tell it to show the border by setting a bottom border width of 1. We end this off by setting the background color to white. Okay, let's test that. We search for React again and great! Now the rows have much better spacing and are easier to identify as rows.